So the employees you're actually talking to are actually already in Colombia, you just don't even know it. I think the biggest one is that you only use nearshoring and offshoring for back office or less important work, when that's definitely not the case. I think that the people that are scared to nearshore is because they might be having some trouble already internally with managing their team. It's not going to be a niche, it's not going to be a want, it's going to convert into a need, in my opinion.
Welcome to Freight Beat, a podcast from the Transportation Intermediaries Association. I'm Merritt,
And I'm Patrick.
and every week we talk with the people who shape freight, logistics, and how this country moves. Today, we're talking about a word you've probably heard thrown around a lot lately, nearshoring, and what it actually means for brokerage. A lot of brokers are curious and occasionally a little nervous about it, so we brought in someone who does this for a living.
Our guest today is Mia Mazal. She's co-founder of Talento, a company that helps freight and logistics businesses build teams in Latin America. Mia's path here is not the usual one. She started out as a behavioral therapist, working with kids before she found her way into logistics. And that background shows up in how she thinks about hiring and keeping good people. Mia, welcome to Freight Beat.
Thanks so much for having me. Super excited.
Of course, yeah. Hey, so obviously we want to dive into nearshoring, but I just have to ask, how does one make the leap from behavioral psychology into logistics? Like, how did you kind of make that connection?
Yeah, it was one where it kind of fell into my lap to some extent. Although I always knew I loved humans, I always knew I wanted to connect with different cultures and be able to start to bridge some of those gaps. So when I had the opportunity to move out to Colombia and enter this industry, I realized that my learning in working with special people translates a lot to working with any human at all whatsoever. This is definitely a special industry, but in a different sense.
Amazing. So to clear up the word itself, when you explain nearshoring to a broker or anybody who you're speaking with who's never done it, what does it actually mean? And how is that different from sending work overseas?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that a lot of times we confuse or use interchangeably the terms nearshoring, offshoring, and outsourcing. And although in retrospect you can use them all to maybe convey the same idea, there are some key differences. One of them being around dedicated solutions or not. When we're looking at outsourcing versus nearshoring and offshoring, there's this concept of, are they turning in a task, or do you have a full time employee dedicated and working only for you? And the second piece I would also recommend to keep in mind is the time zone. So when we're looking at offshoring as well, the biggest piece is that off should signify far away, right? So probably in the Philippines and India, somewhere in Asia, where the time zones are different. But when we're talking about nearshoring, again, the word near means geographical proximity. So being in the same time zone across Pacific towards Eastern, and just facilitating some of those tasks that maybe involve having to have the same daytime and the same nighttime.
So you're not the first person I've talked to in the last couple of months about nearshoring. I mentioned that during our pre-interview. Why now? Like, why are we seeing kind of an uptick in Latin America being kind of drawn into the American logistics kind of universe, I suppose?
I think we started to see this wave right before the pandemic happened as well, where nearshoring was a concept that was starting to be born. But then the pandemic really did facilitate ways to connect through digital platforms, right? So, like right now, how we're connected virtually or through Zoom, through Teams, and things of that nature. And since that kind of opened it up and made it almost to some extent a need, since then we've been able to actually keep that around. And so it's no longer something that people just think about, but it's becoming more and more apparent. And especially because this industry is volatile, the market is volatile, it's always changing. So we need to be ahead of the game, and a cost effective solution where you're not compromising on quality, but you also have a partner or to some extent a backup in this space can be a huge value add.
I definitely think when it comes to nearshoring, there's definitely, and I think you just started off by explaining a misconception, nearshoring versus offshoring or something else like that further away. What are some other misconceptions that you kind of hear about? Is there anything that, I think, we said at the beginning, sometimes people have some kind of trepidation about this. Is there some misconceptions that you can kind of speak to?
Totally. Oh, we could have a whole video and podcast just about misconceptions. But for me, I think the biggest one is that you only use nearshoring and offshoring for back office or less important work when that's definitely not the case. I would challenge people to look at it as just geographically a different location, and that's about it. So maybe you don't have eyes on your team because they're not sitting there in Nashville with you, but you still have another office manager in Medellin that does have eyes on your team. So being able to understand that these are highly qualified professionals. They come with industry experience. They've already worked in companies similar to yours. You don't have to train them on LTL versus FTL. What's a 4PL and what's a 3PL? They already understand this lingo and these terminology. What they're going to want to learn is from your business, which also means that they want to grow with your business. So again, not just kind of delegating your tracking and tracing functions and having them work in that role for the next 10 years. No, these are humans that also have families that want to learn, that want to grow, that have brains that are always being put at work. So just taking that conception that it's not really a number, they really are genuine humans, another full-time employee, just as if they were sitting right there next to you. That's the biggest misconception I like to address.
Out of curiosity, so you worked for a company before, so this isn't your first foray into it when you started this business. But you talked about having somebody you trust in like Medellin or something like that. How do you make those connections if you don't come from a company that is, kind of instigating those relationships that you carry over into a company like the one that you started? I mean, how do you meet people that you're going to trust? In other places where you might not ever have physically met them before.
That's a great question. I think that that's why I also encourage people to really do their due diligence. There's a lot of providers out there, and each one focuses maybe in a different talent pool or has a different skill set. Some might be really good at finding 50 people for you overnight, while others might be good at creating long term career paths and growth paths as well. So, being able to explore and from that exploration, whether you're buying nearshoring or you're buying something else, you're going to want to trust your point of contact. And that's only something that human to human is really, that's how you're determining it, right? We can have great propaganda. I can have some awesome podcasts online, but until you don't meet the sales team or your success team, that's when you really start to know that they have your best interests in mind. What I would also encourage there is ask the right questions. Who is your success team? Do you only get one sales rep and their only job is to upsell you? Do you also get maybe a success manager that spends time with your employees? What does the dynamic look like in the office? Is there even an office space? They're all going to tell you different things, but getting out to Colombia, actually going to visit, seeing your team, seeing the operations is a huge value add that I would recommend for anyone that's a little bit hesitant. Worst case scenario, you might have gotten a free vacation out of it as well. But look at it as a partner. It's not just someone that should be vetting and throwing bodies at you. They really should be consulting you, guiding you, educating you. Every government, every country is different in the way that they regulate and the way that they function. We don't expect our customers to be experts whatsoever. And it's a lot to learn. So they should rely on us for us to be the experts, for us to stay ahead of the game. For example, this year, they've changed the minimum salary. That's going to affect their employees. That's going to affect our pockets. But that's something that Talento, for example, would have to take into account and stay ahead on behalf of our customers. So you really do need to be due diligent and find the partner for you.
This is really more of an observation, I guess, and a question. But you mentioned obviously a lot of this came kind of post pandemic. It seems like it's kind of a natural outgrowth, right, of just the natural move away from in office all the time to hybrid and remote work. Like we live in the DC area. A lot of places are still downtown DC, not as full as it used to be because they're all working remotely. So, is that really kind of what we're seeing? Is this just the maybe not an end point, but an outgrowth of that? Would you say?
Yeah. I mean, I think at the end of the day, you shouldn't limit yourself, right? If I lived, and I'm from Delaware, if I grew up in Delaware and I made a business in Delaware and the only talent pool I tapped into was Delaware, those are like my aunts and uncles, my friends and their cousins, and that's about it. Delaware is pretty small. So why am I going to limit myself to only that skill set and only that talent when I can find some incredible players either sitting in California, sitting in Colombia, sitting in Argentina, wherever it may be? The fact that we also have the digital platforms, right? The technology to support these connections. I think that the people that are scared to nearshore is because they might be having some trouble already internally with managing their team. I often ask people, what are you expecting out of your, for example, sales reps? Are you expecting them to work 8 to 5 and have their mouse moving all day? Or are you tracking how many deals they actually closed? Because if performance to you just means that they sat in their chair and you had eyes on them, then I don't think that you're really measuring what you really are expecting from them. But if you change it to have clarity in terms of how many calls are they making that week? How many deals are they closing? How many opportunities did they even open to begin with? Then when you're measuring the truth, then that's when it won't matter whether they're sitting right next to you, sitting a mile down, or sitting 10,000 miles away.
This episode of Freightbeat is brought to you in part by TIA Watchdog. Watchdog is a great TIA benefit that allows members to share fraud and theft information with each other to ensure that they're making informed decisions about the companies they work with. In this world of expanding cargo theft threats, it's a vital tool to help keep your customers' shipments safe. For more information, head to TIAWatchdog.com and see the latest.
So obviously, you mentioned a lot about metrics. One metric a lot of people kind of lead with when they start talking about, promoting nearshoring and trying to sell this as a product or a service or what have you, they're pushing with the cost savings, right? Being able to pay Central or South American wages for North American work, right? You don't do that. You lead with the idea of keeping people. So, like, what is it about chasing that cheapest, fastest, easiest, the bottom line higher? How does that actually end up costing a broker in the long run?
Whew. So people will see different numbers and I'll kind of throw out a range for you guys, but the cost of turnover is anywhere from 50 to 200% of that employee's annual salary. So if they're an employee, I don't know, tracking and tracing for 60K, then you're really paying from like 30 to 120K when you lose that employee. So for us, it's super important to really focus on the long-term solutions, being proactive and making the right match from the beginning. I always say we might take a day longer than our neighbors because we want it to be 10 years longer in the long run. So retention should be key. It's not only key for us, but it should be key for your company internally as well. Where this is where I think maybe we take it to the next step and you should look for a provider or a partner that does if this is what matters to you, which it should, but it's your culture, right? We already have some kind of proven paths of high retention. From our last quarter, our highest turnover was 3% across our entire company. So we know how to create some different workbooks, activities, structures, things of that nature that help to increase that emotional salary and just strengthen the relationship amongst your employees. So those are some things that you don't have to just keep with your Talento team. You could also replicate them or use them as a guide to influence your US based team as well and help to reduce that turnover that in this industry obviously is very notorious. Depending on the role as well, some percentages higher than other, but overall turnover is strong. And as we talked about in the beginning, it's very costly.
I mean, you're talking about how to kind of keep that from happening, but when things do go wrong, when things go wrong in other countries for brokers, what is usually the culprit? What is the reason why something might kind of fall apart?
Yeah, I think it's a lack of structure. And I would blame both parties. At the end of the day, the customer should have some structure around their departments, around their business and their goals. But us as a partner needs to also ask the right questions to make sure we're setting you up for success. For example, if we're talking a sales role, do you have a commission structure? Because if you're expecting somebody to work as hard as some of your people in the United States who are making thousands of dollars in commission and you're not willing to offer $5, then I think we have a misaligned priority there, or we're just mismatched. And that's not going to be a high performer in that role because they're going to be motivated by money that they're not getting. Or, for example, training. I think this is a huge piece. As I mentioned, these individuals have industry experience. They've worked in, for example, tracking and tracing or building loads before. They might even have familiarity with your exact TMS. But the way that you use your TMS and the way that your neighbor does is a little bit different. The way you like to have communication, maybe you want them to escalate by calling you to your cell phone, versus other customers might want escalation via email. So those little company specific training processes are essential. And I think oftentimes we kind of brush past it and we expect this person to hit the ground day one, which honestly, they hit the ground probably by day 4 and 5. But they do need to understand and they want to integrate to your company. They want to know who their neighbors are, they want to know who their colleagues are. So just expecting them to just plug in and within an hour be hitting the ground like your other teammates, I think that's where we have, again, a misalignment and where I see the biggest area of opportunity to kind of take a step back and talk about the framework and then ensure success.
So let's kind of talk about actually putting this into place, right? Say a small brokerage in particular wanted to take advantage of nearshoring. I guess where should they start? Like, what are the jobs that really they should be handing off first, and then what should they be keeping in house, sort of no matter what? And where is that kind of middle ground?
Great question. So I would recommend that things that you have metrics on, things that you have visibility on, and to some extent low hanging fruit. Those tasks that you want to delegate where you have high turnover and don't take too much brain power or years of experience. And this is typically operations specialists, tracking and tracing, dispatching, customer service. Any of those roles is kind of the bread and butter for nearshoring. They're in the same time zone. If you need them to work overnight, they can as well, but you can train them during your day shift and then they'll switch to their night hours. From there, I also see people kind of take a second step into accounting because they also consider those to some extent back office, right? So billing, AP, AR collections. Now, I wouldn't suggest limiting yourself there. I personally would say that if you have a strong sales team, or better said, a strong sales process, then sales is where I would personally recommend you to start because getting someone to just start hitting the phones, sending out emails, and really filling up your pipeline at the top of the funnel for your US based team to take the bottom of the funnel, that for me is just common sense. It's what we do with our own sales team as well. So I would argue those two departments would be a great place to start.
So when you're setting somebody up, I mean, it sounds like you've got kind of a good system in place to make sure that they're succeeding. But what does that initial kind of onboarding 90-day phase kind of look like? We all talk about, the first 90 days a lot of times are the most pivotal in getting somebody to feel like they're part of the team, to understand how your company culture. How are you using those 90 days to your best advantage when you're communicating with somebody is, like you said, thousands of miles away?
Yeah, totally. I think that it's important to notice that there's almost two facets to it. So when you end up onboarding, let's say with Talento, for example, you have a success team that works both ends. One end is with the customer directly. Are they having the communication channels they need with Talento? We end up being your payroll and your HR. So they need to have transparency with us, quick, effective communication, and at the rhythm, the cadence, and the channel that works best for them. And on the other front is your employees. How are they doing? How are they being integrated? How are they being onboarded? So that's why we end up kind of giving you a complete success team where the customer success manager really is the key piece in engaging with the employees as a second layer of defense, while the manager in the United States is also connecting with their employees. So what we end up doing is we do weekly check-ins for the first 30 days. We start to change those off into bi-weekly check-ins for the next 30, so up into the 60th. And by the 90th, we're going to do a QBR where we sit down with the entire team and the customer and we make sure that we're seeing the same thing. The customer is able to measure those kind of hard skills. And what I'm talking about is number of calls placed, emails sent, loads tracked, things of that nature through their TMS. While we have visibility into the soft skills, are they showing up on time? Are they following the guidelines of the company? Are they engaging when we have a new employee? Are they saying hello to everybody else? Those things that also are key metrics in defining who's silently quitting, who's engaged, who's happy, and who's not. So with that, we end up kind of taking both pieces of the pie and getting a more holistic view of how are these employees doing. We notice that in the first 45 days are the most crucial days to understand is this employee going to stay for the long run or not. And after that, it ends up being at minimum a quarterly business review or a quarterly touch base, while internally we're also continuously meeting with your employees at least monthly and building out growth plans for them that match your business structure. So there's a lot of facets to it. We can be super flexible and a lot of hand holding for some customers. They still include us in their monthly calls, while others kind of want to wean us off and want to handle it on their own, as long as we prepare them for that success, either avenue can work.
I'd asked earlier, what is it though that they should that a U.S. based broker should be keeping in house no matter what? They shouldn't be nearshoring with a group like that.
That's a good question. Um, Nothing? No, I'm kidding.
Sounds like it
So
kind of covers, depending on what you need, you can kind of cover anything, right? So, I mean, is there anything you've seen though that people are really guarded
hesitate
about?
on for
Yeah.
sure. I would say that anything that is maybe touching something very close to you, like your money, for example. We have actually an accounting manager placed with the customer, which I think is really cool. But anybody that is actually in your bank, right, that has access to your systems, if you don't have the right infrastructure and security already set up in the United States, then it's going to be hard for us to replicate something that doesn't exist in Colombia, right? Now, if you already have it set up in the way that you need, then I think we can make a role like that successful. But that's where I typically see the most hesitation, rightfully so, because this is touching very crucial information and access to crucial systems. Outside of that, the other piece I'd mention is carrier sales, because there's a lot of competition between teams. And if you don't take that into account and set them up in a way that there's fair gameplay, then you will always notice that it will come to the detriment of, to some case, the B team, the team that is offsite, that is not sitting next to your managers and is new to the team. So those are two areas where I would just challenge you to make sure you have a strong infrastructure and workflow in place before you start to nearshore it. But oftentimes it's one of the things that we look at last.
So, I mean, I guess speaking then of that interaction between people obviously overseas versus in town, like, what are the friction points you typically see, even with those who have the strong processes, right? We're like, oh, this is an easy, I'll just plug and play. What is the natural friction point between whether it's culturally, whether it's communication wise, whether it's just obviously, honestly, a time zone situation? And then how do you smooth those out? And then I don't know, what if you can't smooth them out? I guess would be the third point of that question.
Yeah, great question. So I would say that all in all, they're all manageable and things that you can work through as long as people are willing to work through and give you the time of day. It's more so about a capacity thing as opposed to capability. But with that said, culture can definitely be something that in the very beginning you might notice, hey, there's some mismatches and we're not sure what's happening. For example, I had one customer actually, particularly where the employees came to us and said, hey, we just don't feel like very valued and very welcomed. And what was happening was that the customer every day would just go in straight and saying, hey, did you email this customer? Hey, did you check in on this load? They weren't saying, good morning, how are you? And personally, I'm guilty of this too. I kind of skip the hellos and the how are yous and I just jump right in. It's just the kind of American mentality in me. With that said, in Colombia, it's a huge cultural expectation to say, hi, how are you? I walk into the elevator and the people will say, hi, how are you? They expect a response and they'll say goodbye when they leave. So that small little thing we brought to the attention of both teams. We ended up running reflection sessions with both teams where we kind of did like a very almost kindergarten activity and we just did like compare and contrast. What are the things we expect here? What are the things that our team is expecting from us? And then we swapped papers and we shared it with the other teams. And so they were able to see that the Colombian team or the Talento Colombian team that they had wanted just a simple hello, while the other team wanted to get straight to work. And so they ended up finding a compromise, right? So this is just one example that what it takes is having both teams being willing to listen, willing to learn, and willing to adapt. It's not going to fit like a puzzle piece because we are very different, but you can make sure that that puzzle piece ultimately ends up fitting together. Again, if you put the work into it. And that's where, again, I'll mention find a good partner. You don't want someone that just says, yeah, this is the way things are, go figure it out. No, you want someone that takes the time to educate your employees in Colombia, but also educate the customer in the United States. We want both of them to have the knowledge, and with that knowledge, then they can take action.
This episode of Freight Beat is brought to you in part by the TIA merch store. Want to look as good as me and Patrick? Have I got the place for you? From hats to t-shirts, backpacks, golf bags, water bottles, and more, the TIA merch store is your one-stop shop to fly the TIA flag. Share your support of the brokerage industry and the hard work that TIA does, and do it fashionably. Visit TIAmerch.com and see what's available.
So how else? I mean, you've talked about a few ways to make kind of people feel comfortable and work together as a team, but obviously when someone's starting in a role, they want to feel not only that they're part of the culture, that they're accepted and they're, there's room for growth. How do you make somebody thousands of miles away feel like they, are contributing to the culture in like a tangible way? Because I think one thing that, I've noticed working in person, uh, everything has its pluses and minuses, but being able to see in real time what difference something makes, someone being able to walk to your office and tell you something like that. I mean, I know this is true with kind of virtual employees in general, but how do you do it kind of more specifically when they're thousands of miles away and they might never be able to come to like a company holiday party or something like that?
No, totally. I think that's a great question to ask. I would argue to go visit Colombia because I think it's awesome and it really does go a long way. That face to face at the end of the day, the connection you have in person, I mean, we know it. There's something special about that. With that said, since that can't be replaced, there are cases where maybe the employee can't travel or the customer can't travel. That doesn't mean that there aren't other ways to connect. So, for example, creating those organic spaces. Set a 15-minute reflection session on Friday where if you guys have nothing to talk about, at the very least, you're talking about how was your dog's birth this week, or what are you doing with your children on the 4th of July? Whatever it may be, but those spaces where you have the hallway conversations and you get to know them as humans, as people, more than just your employee or your offshore team or your nearshore team, that's where it goes a long way. So I would really recommend follow the same US based practices you're doing. When you have a new employee, do you give a welcome announcement in your team's chat? Then do the same for your new Talento employee. Are you sending out swag and maybe like a hat on your first day and a notebook and a journal? We do that for the Talento team, but would they also want your swag, right? They also want to wear the customer's hat. They want to feel part of your team. A lot of times people will do like new employee announcements on LinkedIn. That's something that they want to be included in as well. So just those virtual spaces, organic spaces where you can just get to know each other as humans is something I would encourage whether you're near shore or not.
So obviously, we've been talking a lot about effectively, it is important to make the Talento employee feel like an employee of your own brokerage, right? But obviously, you're also introducing someone that you really need to trust because they have fingers in all your data, your customers' data, your load board tools, all those things. What processes, what in your view and what you've seen, what needs to be in place if a brokerage wants to engage with a group like Talento to make sure all that's taken care of, is safe, but also obviously is, operational because that person, Columbia or wherever, needs to be able to do the job. Like what needs to be in place, I suppose.
I think that there needs to be like almost an IT diagnostic check before the process is even started, which is something that we'd be happy to do on your behalf. But it depends on the processes that they're touching, the employee specifically, and what tools they're using. For example, a couple of carrier vetting tools might require a VPN access to be able to sign in through Colombia, versus some others might not require it. Thirdly, some customers just want employees to sign in through a VPN at all times. So, what I would encourage people to do is have clear infrastructure, have a clear structure around what is it that you are willing to delegate and where are you not willing to let go of. And around that, we can help build an infrastructure that is conducive to security, but also allowing the employee to work. A virtual or remote desk is something that oftentimes customers will ask for, which ultimately what that does gives them access to be able to enter the employee system and basically unplug them in 1 second if need be. That's what I would recommend is one of the most important and minimal steps as well, because it's just a kind of a backup, a plan B in case you would ever need to do those things. But this is where you really need to trust in Talento and your partner. That, for example, when we say we have three fiber optics Wi-Fi provider and it's only within our red or our like network and nobody else can connect to it, then that's ours. Then that's our risk to take, right? And you guys will need to trust us. Any information around cybersecurity and insurance and things of that nature is paperwork that you should be asking for. They should have it. Your partner should have it. Anything around that needs to be considered, needs to be asked in the beginning. But all in all, to make it a little bit easier for you guys, the majority, 99% of the cases in which we onboard, no extra technology is needed. We already have the infrastructure set up to be able to mitigate any risk. And ultimately, all employees also sign a non-disclosure agreement. So last case scenario, we do have some protection directly with the employee as well, but it all falls on Talento and the customer ideally should not have to worry about any of it.
When you're dealing in, I mean, trust is kind of everything these days. So when you're dealing with customers that are, or you have a customer and they're working with people, they're near shoring or something like that, and their customers might be like, okay, so you have some of these employees in other countries, but they have some fears. Have you noticed that any of the folks that you work with have to kind of quell those fears, and how they do that? They say, yes, we do work. We have an American team, but we also have teams elsewhere. Is there any kind of sense of trust that needs to be earned and with customers, and how do you do that?
I think that's a super great question. Personally, I haven't heard of those fears, although I'm sure they exist. And I would probably confidently say that the customer might have to advocate on behalf of their team to that their own customer at the end of the day. But oftentimes people don't even notice, right? Because they're not checking into their IP address and seeing where they're located. It's just a voice on the phone. And at this point, the United States is a melting pot. So you could be calling from any state and have an accent, and that could be to some extent it's normal or it's typical today and day. What I've actually seen and heard is the contrary. I hear it as a value add because oftentimes my customer's customer is probably from somewhere else as well. So when they're able to either speak in their native language and both connect in Spanish, or they notice that they're both immigrants or they're both not located in the US, I actually noticed that it ends up being a connection point, a bonding point, as opposed to the contrary. But it could also be that they're only passing me the nice information and not the maybe harsher comments. I think let's be realistic. Obviously, in the United States, there can be some tension. There is a lot of prejudice around, hey, this person has an accent, they're not from here. Do I want them representing my team or not? But I believe that we're a pretty globally interconnected world, and every day some of those negative points or discrimination is reduced more and more, and we become more connected and more receptive to having people that are from different places. So I think what you're saying is plausible, but thankfully for me, it doesn't really touch my network.
Hey, we saw with the World Cup this past summer, right? I mean, everyone likes having all these cultures here in America. It was a total blast. We had a lot of fun with that going on. Obviously, I mentioned earlier, this kind of feels like a natural outgrowth and kind of extension of the move towards hybrid and remote work that's really across the country, if not the world, right? I mean, a few years out, like, how normal do you see the idea of nearshoring and kind of introducing teams that you can get a hold of at a moment's notice, but having them be across the world, right? How niche do you see this being going forward, or more common? Is this something you can see growing across this industry and other industries as well?
Oh, yeah. I honestly see it taking over if it's not already taken over. I don't see this being a niche at all. I see this happening in every business to some format, whether it's nearshore, offshore, outsourcing. I believe to some extent, all companies, I would argue, are already doing it. If you think of a PEO, a PEO is outsourcing, and a PEO typically nearshores their back office as well. So the employees you're actually talking to are actually already in Colombia. You just don't even know it. So I think it's the next trend, the next move. And more than that, I think it's going to become ultimately a need. It's a cost effective, high quality solution. And it's not just for staffing and hiring, but also for growth, right? For innovation. We end up, for example, at Talento, to some extent, becoming experts in the industry because all of our customers are carriers, shippers, TMSs, tech providers, all under the supply chain branch. And so we're able to really see what does and what doesn't work. We're able to to some extent see some patterns and be able to proactively kind of watch them come. And we're able to also be that vetting partner for you, right? If I know that TIA is always up to date with rules and legislation and has some awesome content, then I'm going to guide my customers to stay up to date with TIA, to attend their conference, to be engaged in their organizations, to maybe check out Technovations as well. So it's more than just the staffing piece. I think that it ends up being a partner in your industry, an expert to some extent in your industry that can guide you on multiple solutions. So more of a reason why it's not going to be a niche. It's not going to be a want. It's going to convert into a need, in my opinion.
So I think a lot of people probably realize, or I mean, just like with anything, it's like this new kind of concept that you're saying is a huge cost saver. It's going to become ubiquitous. Everyone's going to need it. Of course, when anything like that happens, a ton of companies that don't actually know what they're doing are going to come out and say that they do. So
Yes.
if you're interested in nearshoring and you're like, we need to move in this direction, and you have, I mean, this, I feel like this is the same with AI, a lot of AI. It's like there is a ton of different companies that I could work with, a ton of different people. How do you vet the people that you might end up working with and make sure that they can really back up what they're saying they can do?
That's a fantabulous question. First and foremost, referrals. Don't trust the sales rep, right? Don't trust me. Don't trust the person doing all the talking, but go to their customers and ask them their genuine opinion, their genuine experience. And secondly, the employees. Getting to talk to the employees and say, hey, how has your relationship been with Talento? Because they're not just trusting you, they're trusting me as well. If I'm telling you that I'm building a beautiful culture of retention alongside yours, then you're going to need to believe me. And the best way to believe that is to hear it from the voice of the people actually experiencing it. I will say, in that sense, I'm a little bit biased because I lived in Colombia for a year as well. So I had some of the same perspective as my employees, and I kind of grew my way up from there. But I think that that's essential is getting the actual experience or the perspective from a real user, not just the person selling to you, and then compare and contrast, right? There's going to be multiple providers. It doesn't mean that because I chose A, that B, C, and D are just not good providers. That's not true at all. Everyone's different. Everyone has different needs. Everybody has different wants. So define what those are for yourself. And then as you're having your exploration conversations, start to rate them, start to kind of score them or tier them. And then you can throw those numbers into ChatGPT and ultimately find the partner for you. But there's multiple different solutions. There's a lot of different levels of support or delegation. And so that's why you really do need to do your due diligence again and your exploration and ask the right questions.
If someone walks away today, I mean, I think, a lot of these companies, they've been around forever. They've found something that works. They're hearing somebody like you say, this is kind of the future. This is where we need to head. And, changing an operation overnight is not a thing. It's not, that's very difficult. So what are some small steps that you would make recommendations for in order to kind of dip your toe in the water and learn more about what this could look like for your company?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would recommend listening to things like this, doing some podcasts where you're able to educate yourself and maybe start to spark some curiosity before you trigger any other conversations. And then work on your business plan. What's your 1, 3, and 5 year goals? And from there, you can kind of reverse engineer and see whether nearshoring, offshoring, or a different model is the partner for you. Some might even realize that, hey, maybe I'm ready for the next 5 years to open up my own office internationally. And now the questions you're going to be asking your nearshore partner are totally different. So I would really encourage you to, if anything today, start in the awareness stage, start getting educated, start getting curious, ask the right questions. And from there, absolutely, if I'm able to help you or any other providers, I'm sure I'd be more than happy to help you. We can set up a conversation, really more of a consultation, and explore the different solutions and see if they fit for you.
Cool. Well, yeah, this has been fantastic. Honestly, it's kind of a I don't want to say mysterious topic for a lot of brokers out there, but it's one they don't talk about very much. So this has been a lot of great time kind of clearing that sort of stuff up. Um, Mia Mazal, you are the co-founder of Talento, which helps logistics companies build teams across Latin America. Where can people find you and learn more about Talento and your work?
Absolutely. I am all over LinkedIn. If you Google me, you'll probably find me as well at Mia Mazal, or you can find us at talento-io.com. But if you just comment as well anywhere, I'm sure I will find you and happy to help any questions at all.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, again, thank you so much for joining us, and everyone out there in internet land. Thank you again for listening and watching. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, of course. Remember to rate, review, and subscribe. I think I said that part already. Give us a like on YouTube. Follow us on Instagram. Follow us on LinkedIn. Until next time, I have been Merritt,
I've been Patrick.
and we'll talk to you soon.